Welcome back to the deep dive. We are moving past the daily news cycle and diving headfirst into the colossal questions,
The really big ones.
the foundational mysteries that really define human thought. You are here because you want the shortcut, the distilled knowledge from history's best minds, all focused on one ultimate subject. Today, we are tackling, well, it's probably the most profound question possible.
I'd say so.
Did the universe have a beginning? Or is reality eternal? And this isn't just some abstract theoretical puzzle.
No, not at all.
The answer fundamentally shapes, well, everything. Every civilization, every philosophy, every scientific endeavor. We've synthesized sources that span ancient myth, rigorous philosophical debates that define the Middle Ages.
And all the way up to the sharp, sometimes speculative edge of modern cosmology.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Our mission today is really to give you the architecture of this historical debate. We're distilling how different major worldviews, from ancient priests observing the heavens to contemporary physicists studying the cosmic background, have grappled with this mystery of origins.
So we're looking for the structure of their answers.
Exactly. The structural answers they provided and, maybe more importantly, why those answers persisted across millennia.
Okay, so when we ask if the universe had a beginning, it sounds simple, but the sources show we're actually wrestling with, three distinct, interwoven core questions?
That's right. The first is temporal. It's about time itself. Did time, did it actually start at some point, or has it just always been flowing?
Right. And the second question is more ontological. Is that the right word? The state of existence.
Yep. Was there ever a transition from absolute pure nothingness to somethingness?
Or is existence just, the default setting of reality?
And the third question, this one really challenges our intuition. It asks if reality could have always existed in some form, maybe shifting and changing, but without ever needing a single definable first moment.
Which kind of pushes against our human tendency to create these neat linear stories, a beginning, a middle, and end.
Precisely.
And that immediately sets up this great divide that we see repeated throughout history, no matter the culture or the era. Our sources clearly delineate three primary intellectual camps. The first, and maybe the most dominant in the Western tradition, is that the universe began with a clear creative act.
A definitive, one-time start, a single gunshot.
The second camp offers a complete counterpoint. The universe isn't a one-time event, but part of an eternal cycle.
Like the universe breathing.
Yeah, I like that. Expanding and contracting, being created and destroyed as a continuous process, which, fundamentally negates the need for a singular inaugural moment.
It just always is.
And the third camp, which we'll save for the end, suggests that both of those answers might be rooted in a deep conceptual misunderstanding. It's the conceptual twist.
The idea that time itself may be so intrinsically linked to the universe that the very word beginning.
It just might not mean what we intuitively think it means when we're talking about the entire cosmos.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, understanding these three models is key. This deep dive is a comprehensive shortcut. We are taking centuries of accumulated argument, from the debates over creatio ex nihilo to proposals of modern cyclic cosmologies, and giving you the map to cosmic origins.
So you gain not just the facts, but the structural insight into how humanity has framed its own ultimate existence.
That's the goal.
Let's jump straight into part one then. Ancient cosmologies. Before science could, measure the expansion rate of space, how did people arrive at their fundamental view of time?
They looked at the world around them.
And what they often saw was the circle. So we start with this intuition of the cycle, the idea that reality is just too profound, too intricate to have just appeared once, finished and complete.
Right. It seems to operate more like breathing. It moves in these enormous, endless, repeating patterns.
Which would have mirrored what they saw in the natural world every single day.
Absolutely. And the best historical example of this is probably Hindu cosmology. It's defined by these staggering, almost incomprehensible timescales. For this tradition, the universe does not have a single ultimate start.
No beginning.
It's defined by a ceaseless, automatic process of manifestation and dissolution. It just happens.
To give you a sense of the scale here, the sources talk about a unit called a kalpa. And a kalpa represents one full day in the life of the deity Brahma, the creator. A kalpa consists of 1,000 mahayugas.
And just one mahayuga is itself a cycle of 4.32 million human years.
The numbers are just mind-boggling.
We really are. So one kalpa, one single day of Brahma, is about 4.32 billion years, roughly the age of the Earth.
And that's just one day of creation.
Just one day. Once that day is over, the universe is drawn back into a state of potentiality, only to be reborn again the next day.
And this continues for 100 years of Brahma, which is... I can't even do the math on that.
It's an astronomical measure of time. And even then, after Brahma's life cycle ends, a new Brahma appears, and the whole sequence just starts all over again.
So the core intuition here is that nothing is ever truly lost, and there's no single first instance of reality.
Everything that exists now has existed before.
And will exist again, maybe in the exact same form.
This cyclical view isn't just isolated to Eastern traditions either. We see very similar structures in the ancient West, particularly among Greek philosophers.
You mean like the Stoics?
Take the Stoics, for example. They didn't have the vast number cycles of the Hindus, but they did conceive of ekpyrosis.
Which means, what, periodic cosmic destruction?
By fire, yeah, a great cosmic conflagration.
But this ekpyrosis, it wasn't a punishment or some final end. It was a necessary cleansing, right?
Right.
And it was followed by palingenesis.
Renewal, rebirth. The universe would effectively be reset, often reproducing the previous world exactly, down to the smallest detail. It's a perpetual self-sustaining loop.
So even Socrates would live the same life again.
The exact same life, make the exact same arguments, and drink the exact same hemlock, over and over.
And, many indigenous traditions embrace this view too, time as rhythmic and circular. Their cosmologies are often tied directly to these observed, inescapable patterns in nature.
The rotation of the seasons.
The life, death, rebirth cycles of animals and plants. It's a universe that's governed by recurring processes, not by some kind of linear progress towards a goal.
What's so fascinating here is that these traditions derive the idea of eternity not from mathematical proofs or, deductive logic.
Or just from watching the world.
Purely from observed, visible patterns in life. If the forest renews itself every spring, why on earth should the cosmos be any different? It is the macrocosm mirroring the microcosm.
But that raises a pretty big question. If the universe is endlessly repeating, doesn't that inherently strip away any sense of unique progress? Or even, individual historical purpose?
It's a huge philosophical problem with the idea.
I mean, if I live the exact same life again, exactly the same way, does my current life really matter? That's the question this eternal cycle model seems to pose.
And that is precisely the tension. For that cyclic mindset, meaning often lies not in unique events, but in participating harmoniously in the eternal universal law, the Dharma or the Logos.
So it's about alignment.
Right. The purpose isn't to get to some final new destination, but to align with the relentless, ordered rhythm of existence itself.
That sets the stage perfectly for the radical departure. We transition to linear time, the view that we in the modern West often just take for granted. And this view fundamentally breaks the circle and draws a straight line. This is the invention of the one-time creation.
This foundational shift happens most prominently within the Abrahamic traditions, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
And here, the focus is squarely on creatio ex nihilo.
Creation out of nothing. The universe is not divine, it is contingent. It is completely dependent on something outside of itself.
So there is a definitive before, where only an eternal, transcendent God exists.
And then a specific, deliberate moment when God freely brings all things into being. Matter, energy, space, and crucially, time itself.
And that's the key. Time is part of the package.
It's the critical conceptual boundary, and it's one that will echo down all the way through the Big Bang discussion later, since time is a created element, part of the cosmos.
The immediate question that springs to the human mind, what was before the beginning?
Is rendered conceptually flawed. It's a nonsense question.
Because the concept of before requires time to exist.
Right.
And if time began at the beginning, then the question is just. It's meaningless. The sources cite that analogy. Asking what was before the beginning is like asking, what is north of the North Pole?
You can't go north of the North Pole?
The concept of north just doesn't apply past that point of definition. The concept of before doesn't apply past the moment of time's creation.
In this view, only God is eternal, unbound by time. The universe is defined by its having a temporal existence.
It has a start date.
And that's the foundation of the linear, history-driven worldview.
The implication of this linear view is absolutely enormous. It fundamentally changes human concepts of history, of morality.
Everything.
If the universe has a start and is moving toward an end, whether that's ultimate fulfillment, a return to God, or final judgment, then it has a history, it has a direction, and a unique, non-repeatable narrative.
And it gives human life, as you pointed out earlier, a unique significance, a weight.
because this moment has never happened before and will never happen again.
So the events, the choices, the progress made within this linear history are meaningful. And they're irreversible. You're moving from point A to point B, driven by purpose, not just endlessly cycling through the same patterns.
And the contrast between those two ancient frameworks, the relentless pattern-driven circle versus the purposeful history-driven line, created this unavoidable intellectual conflict.
A conflict that set the stage for centuries of debate.
And that intellectual conflict is really what pushed thinkers towards the rigorous philosophical scrutiny of the Middle Ages.
Precisely, because you can't just argue your way into believing in cyclical time if your holy book insists on a linear creation.
And you can't argue your way out of a cycle if all you see around you is repeating patterns.
It required pure reason to try and settle the score.
And that leads us perfectly into part 2, philosophical rigor, where humanity attempts to rely purely on reason rather than on myth or revelation to answer this question.
And that conversation, it has to start with the great authority, Aristotle.
Okay, let's unpack this ancient philosopher's powerful argument for an eternal universe. And he reached this conclusion not by divine inspiration, but through pure systematic logic.
Right. Aristotle, operating back in the 4th century BC, concluded the world must have always existed.
His reasoning was, it feels deceptively simple, but it's incredibly hard to refute based just on observation.
It is. His core argument rested on the necessity of motion and time. Aristotle viewed motion as the passage from potentiality to actuality.
From what could be to what is.
Exactly. For him, if the universe ever came into being, something must have changed it from a state of non-existence to existence.
But if there was truly nothing before the universe, then there was nothing to cause that change, nothing to initiate that first action.
So motion and time must therefore have always existed. Otherwise, you run into the logical paradox of something spontaneously generating itself from absolute zero, which Aristotle just rejected out of hand.
So if time had a beginning, he argued, we would run into this profound intellectual difficulty.
You'd have to explain how the change occurred that started the clock. And since time and motion are inseparable from the cosmos.
The cosmos itself must have no first moment. Logically, the universe has to be eternal.
You can see the trap.
I do. If you say, God created the universe at time, t equals 0, the immediate question is, well, what was happening at t equals -1? And even if the answer is nothing, that still implies a passage of time from -1 to 0, which violates the premise that 0 is the start of time.
Aristotle forces us to accept that reality must have always been in motion. There was never a before.
Now, here is the crucial nuance that often gets missed, but is so vital for understanding his influence, even though he argued for an eternal universe in time.
He still required a first cause.
The unmoved mover.
The unmoved mover.
And the unmoved mover is often confused with the creator god of monotheism, but they're fundamentally different things.
Completely different. Let's use an analogy to clarify this distinction, one that you see in the sources.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Is the divine cause like someone who flicked the light switch once, starting the current, running through the circuit? That's a temporal cause, a one-time act, like the monotheistic creator.
Right, an act in the past.
Or is the divine cause like the continuous electrical current in the wall socket, powering the light bulb at every single moment? That's an ontological cause.
I see. So Aristotle's mover is the generator, constantly sustaining the energy.
Exactly. It is not a creator at a specific moment in time who starts the engine and then just walks away.
Instead, it is the eternal source of motion and order that sustains the universe at every moment. The dependence is continuous and simultaneous, not something that happened before.
So Aristotle gives us a universe that is eternal in time, never having had a moment of non-existence, but one that is still utterly dependent on a necessary divine source for its continued existence, its order, and its motion.
It's an eternal, continuous creation, not creation in time.
And that framework was immensely powerful because it relied only on reason.
This is where it gets really interesting then. When these powerful, reason-based eternal ideas from Aristotle clashed head-on with the powerful, revelation-based linear creation ideas from monotheism.
A true clash of titans.
This confrontation drove the intellectual output of the entire medieval period in the Islamic world, in Jewish philosophy, and in Christian Europe.
And the clash centered largely on trying to find the flaw in Aristotle's system, specifically regarding the problem of the past.
The universe is eternal, then its history must contain an infinite number of past events.
And the question is an actual infinite number logically viable? Can that actually exist in reality?
This is where we introduce the argument for a beginning, championed fiercely by thinkers like the great Islamic theologian al-Ghazali.
Right. He argued vigorously that an actual infinite past is logically impossible. Therefore, the universe must have begun.
To get your head around this, let's use the strong analogy suggested in the sources.
You good word.
Imagine you were trying to count. It's always possible to count up toward infinity. You can always add one more number.
Of course.
But imagine trying to count down from an infinite number to reach zero, to reach the present moment.
That would be impossible. If the past were actually infinite, you would never finish traversing it.
And therefore, you could never reach the present.
And the sources emphasize that since we are in the present moment, the past must be finite.
We've arrived, so the journey couldn't have been infinite.
Since you cannot complete the act of traversing an infinite set, Al-Ghazali concluded, there must have been a first moment of creation by God, thus limiting the past to a finite span.
And it was one of the most intellectually compelling arguments for a temporal beginning derived purely from logic, totally independent of Scripture.
It's a brutally difficult argument to counter purely on logical grounds because the human mind just struggles so much with the concept of actual infinity.
But other intellectual giants of the era offered a necessary counter-perspective. They maintained that an eternal universe was philosophically defensible, even if one accepted the existence of an eternal, singular God.
And we see this synthesis developed by figures like Thomas Aquinas in the West and Averroes Ibn Rushd in the Islamic world.
And they argued that the universe could potentially be eternal in time and still be fundamentally dependent on God.
God's role isn't just starting the clock, but upholding existence itself.
This connects back seamlessly to Aristotle's unmoved mover, but integrates it with a profound theological understanding of God as an ontological source.
Yes, the critical question shifts entirely away from when the universe began, which is a temporal issue, to how it depends on something beyond itself.
An ontological dependence that is deeper than time itself.
To use another analogy that clarifies ontological dependence, the universe is dependent on God the way a shadow is dependent on the object casting it.
Okay, that's a great image. The shadow doesn't exist before the object.
It exists because of the object, at every single instant. If the object were removed, the shadow would vanish simultaneously.
So the argument is that creation isn't just an event at the beginning of the timeline.
It's a constant, sustaining relationship between the contingent universe and the necessary being.
Exactly. For Aquinas, the dependence is what matters far more than the start date. Even if the world had existed eternally, it would still rely on God as its sustaining necessary source at every moment.
And this led to his highly influential and, at the time, very controversial stance.
Which was?
That reason alone, without the aid of revelation, cannot actually prove whether the universe had a beginning in time.
Wow. That is a massive philosophical concession.
It is.
He's essentially saying that both models, the eternal and the created in time, are logically viable based purely on observation and reason.
That intellectual deadlock, the tightest knot of the Middle Ages, meant that the question could only be resolved through faith, not pure deduction.
And that deadlock remained for centuries.
It did. And what ultimately changed the terms of the debate wasn't another logical proof or theological synthesis, but a powerful new wave of data and mathematical models emerging from the observatory.
So now we shift gears entirely to part 3, the modern cosmic picture. With the rise of modern science, the question of the universe's beginning moved out of the philosophical library and into the laboratory and the observatory.
And science offered evidence for a specific kind of beginning, the Big Bang.
We have to remember the historical context here. Before the Big Bang model, the assumption was often that the universe was static and eternal.
It fit neatly into that Aristotelian tradition.
But the observations of the 20th century just shattered that.
Absolutely. The Big Bang model, developed through the work of figures like Georges Lemaitre and Edwin Hubble, describes a universe that has been expanding from an unimaginably hot, dense early state.
And the evidence for this model rests on 3 critical pillars.
The first is Hubble's law, the observation that nearly all galaxies are moving away from us.
And the farther away they are, the faster they are receding.
Which implies a universe that is expanding. You just run the movie backward.
The second, and this was maybe the most decisive piece of evidence, is the cosmic microwave background, the CMB.
The afterglow.
This faint, uniform radiation permeating all of space, the heat signature of that initial hot, dense state detectable today.
It's pretty much irrefutable evidence that the universe was once very small and very hot.
And the third pillar is the abundance of light elements.
Right, the fact that the early universe produced exactly the right ratios of hydrogen and helium that the Big Bang model predicted.
It confirmed the temperatures and densities required for early nuclear synthesis. It all just fit.
So, by extrapolating backward from all this data, we reach a moment where space and time itself seem to collapse into a point of infinite density and zero volume.
The cosmological singularity.
And this model suggests space and time themselves may have a finite past, a temporal beginning that is startlingly specific, about 13.8 billion years ago.
And crucially, the key conceptual difference here is that the universe is not sitting in some empty, pre-existing container or space.
Right. Instead, space-time itself is what expands. It is not an explosion in space, it is the expansion of space.
This brings the scientific discussion right back to the conceptual walls faced by medieval theologians.
It really does. Since space-time is generated by the Big Bang, asking what was before the Big Bang may not make any sense.
Just as asking what is earlier than the first moment of time did not make sense to Al-Ghazali or Aquinas.
It's the same conceptual wall all over again, but just translated into physics.
So if time is like a river, the Big Bang isn't a dam in the middle of the river. It's the point where the spring bubbled up from the ground.
Good analogy. There is no river upstream of that spring.
The reception of this scientific model was, I imagine, complex and highly polarized.
Oh, very. The model was startlingly successful, yet highly uncomfortable for those committed to an eternal universe.
And I'm sure some religious thinkers welcomed it immediately.
They did. They saw it as a powerful scientific echo of creation with a distinct beginning, perhaps confirming the creatio ex nihilo tradition laid out in Genesis.
It was compelling evidence against the rival steady-state model that was prominent at the time.
For sure. However, there was an important caution raised, particularly by thoughtful scientists and theologians.
And that was?
That science provides physical models of events. It does not provide full metaphysical explanations. We have to be careful not to quickly identify the Big Bang with religious creation stories.
That's a vital distinction. Science describes the physical manifestation of how the universe came to be, the hot, dense state, the expansion.
Whereas theology addresses the metaphysical reason why there is anything at all. The question of necessary existence versus contingent existence.
The two shouldn't be confused, and science shouldn't be used as a simple gap filler for metaphysical certainty. But not all of science pointed towards a single, finite beginning. Just as the ancients had their cycles, modern science developed alternatives that brought back that ancient intuition of eternity.
That's right. In fact, the very term Big Bang was coined by a proponent of arrival theory.
It was meant to be insulting, right?
It was derisively coined by the astronomer Fred Hoyle, who advocated for the steady-state theory in the mid-20th century. Hoyle strongly favored the intuition of eternity.
And the steady-state idea suggested that while the universe is expanding, that was an established fact by then.
New matter is constantly and spontaneously generated to maintain a constant density.
So the universe has no beginning and no end. It was eternally the same, even while it grew.
While the CMB ultimately invalidated that simple steady-state theory, the pursuit of an eternal universe continues today through much more technical and speculative models.
Like the cyclic and bounce cosmologies.
Which directly revive the ancient Hindu and Stoic cyclical ideas.
So the core challenge the Big Bang faces is the singularity, that point where physics breaks down. Bounce models try to resolve this by suggesting the singularity never actually happened.
Right. Instead, the universe goes through endless phases. Expansion, followed by contraction, a big crunch.
Which leads to another rebound or a big bounce.
In these models, which often involve very complex concepts like string theory or quantum gravity, the universe tunnels through that singularity, preventing the collapse and restarting the expansion.
So there's potentially no first cycle.
Just an endless sequence of manifestations, much like the Hindu kalpas, but dressed up in quantum mechanics.
That is just striking. It means modern physicists, armed with the most advanced math, are running into the exact same structural conflict that ancient thinkers faced.
Linear narrative versus cyclical flow.
And then, of course, we have the multiverse.
Right. This is the idea, often arising from inflation theory, that our universe is merely one localized, expanding bubble in a much larger, potentially eternal meta-reality or cosmos.
The multiverse suggests that our specific Big Bang was just a localized temporal event, the birth of our bubble, within a much grander, timeless whole.
A whole known as the eternally inflating landscape, or something similar.
So if the underlying reality, the field that constantly generates these bubbles, is eternal, then the overall reality has no beginning.
Our history of 13.8 billion years is merely the limited lifespan of our particular pocket of space-time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is truly astounding. Modern science is debating the exact same fundamental structural choices, linear versus cyclic, finite versus eternal, that ancient philosophers and priests debated millennia ago.
The language has changed from ekpyrosis to cosmic crunch and from creatio ex nihilo to inflationary field, but the core philosophical dilemma remains completely unchanged.
Which brings us to part 4, the conceptual trap of beginning. We've established the historical, philosophical, and scientific answers. Now we have to ask, what does this all mean for our fundamental understanding of reality? And why is this question so difficult to pin down, regardless of the model we prefer?
We need to look at how different worldviews incorporate and respond to the scientific data, because the ultimate answer is never just a matter of physics.
It's a matter of metaphysics.
Exactly.
So let's start again with a theological perspective that insists on creation with a beginning, even in the face of all this scientific complexity.
For thoughtful monotheistic believers, the Big Bang is not an explanation for God. It is the physical description of a metaphysical act.
The act of creation.
The core theological claim remains that God is the ontological source, the necessary being, and the Big Bang is the contingent manifestation of that source.
As we touched on before, thoughtful theologians actively caution against reducing God to merely a gap filler for scientific uncertainty.
Right. If science changes its mind next week and proves a successful cyclic model, theology doesn't just collapse.
Because God remains the reason why there is any existence at all, not just the starter pistol for the universe's expansion.
The emphasis is on transcendence. The source of creation exists outside of the time and space it created. Thus, scientific models, whether they're linear or cyclic, can only describe the behavior of the created system, not the reason for the creation itself.
Okay, now let's consider the eternal or cyclic perspective, which finds resonance in some of these modern scientific models.
Modern cyclic models are those involving an eternal multiverse. They resonate deeply with worldviews focused on manifestation, dissolution, and rebirth.
For these traditions, the universe may not have a single beginning, but it is deeply ordered. It's lawful and patterned.
And the focus shifts entirely away from the need for a single, unique starting point and toward understanding the inherent laws of existence.
So this view often emphasizes process over product. The essential relationship isn't framed as God versus a one-time creation,
but rather on understanding our place in an endless ordered process. Order, lawfulness, and pattern, the cosmic rhythm, are the central themes, and existence is simply what reality does.
And finally, we have the secular or naturalistic perspective, which accepts the scientific findings, but insists that any answer has to be found internally.
No supernatural explanation is required or accepted.
In this view, whether the universe had a beginning or not, the question of origin must be answered entirely by natural laws and physical explanations that are internal to the universe itself.
Things like quantum fluctuations or gravity dynamics.
And there is a radical philosophical suggestion here, too.
There is. Perhaps asking the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is a wrongly framed question altogether. Or maybe it's simply beyond the limitations of human reason.
Which is accepting a brute fact about existence.
That the universe just is, which goes against our deep human search for ultimate explanation. It's a very difficult intellectual stance to maintain.
This brings us to the conceptual heart of the matter. Throughout this entire history of debate, from Aristotle to the Big Bang, why is it so incredibly hard to settle this question?
Are we trapped by our language?
And our everyday experience? What exactly is a beginning when applied to the whole cosmos?
This is where our everyday language really fails us. The conceptual conundrum is deep. If time is part of the universe, which is what both the monotheistic creation story and the Big Bang model suggest,
then a beginning of the universe is inherently a beginning of time.
We cannot easily or perhaps even logically imagine a time before it.
Because the framework necessary for before that chronological ordering didn't exist.
It's a category error. You're trying to apply temporal concepts outside the temporal realm.
And that failure is rooted in our intuition,
Yeah.
right? Our everyday experience of beginnings, the start of a story, the beginning of a day, the birth of a human life.
Is always situated within a larger ongoing time stream. Every beginning we know is a relative beginning.
We just don't have an intuitive framework for an absolute beginning.
A beginning where the time stream itself starts.
Our brain tries to fill that void with an empty space and silent clock hands. But that is simply a picture of time that is empty, not a true state of non-time.
Exactly. Our language and everyday thinking trap us into thinking of the origin as an event that happens in time rather than the origination of time.
And philosophers suggest that reality could be far more subtle than our binary categories of beginning versus eternal.
Which is the most mind-bending part of this entire deep dive. How do we escape the temporal trap?
One subtle alternative, often explored in non-dualistic philosophy and some speculative quantum models, is the suggestion that reality might be a timeless ground.
A field or source that exists outside of our familiar four dimensions that gives rise to time.
So time, in this view, is a derived property of existence,
Right.
like temperature or pressure, not the fundamental basis of it.
Right. The beginning of the universe would then be the moment that this timeless ground manifested a temporal reality, a reality that we can perceive.
Another suggestion is that beginning might just be a necessary feature of our human perspective.
A narrative tool we use to understand change.
To give coherence to causality, rather than an objective truth about the entire universe itself, we tell stories that require a start, middle, and end.
And the cosmos might not be following our narrative structure.
Wow. We've covered a truly vast amount of ground, tracking the human mind's greatest effort to pin down its own origins. Let's review the diverse and powerful answers we gathered in this deep dive. We have heard the clear beginning, driven by a transcendent God and echoed by the Big Bang model.
Which demands a purposeful, linear history.
We've explored the notion of endless cycles found in Hinduism, Stoicism, and modern cyclic physics.
Which favors the pattern, the rhythm, and the idea that existence is an automatic, perpetual function of reality.
And we have seen the nuanced middle ground, a scientifically finite past that may have emerged from an eternal or larger reality we don't yet understand.
Perhaps a multiverse, or a philosophical framework where existence itself is eternally dependent but not necessarily time-bound.
What stands out, after charting all these models, is what drives this relentless questioning. Why do we keep asking if the universe had a beginning when the answer seems to consistently push the limits of our knowledge and our language?
It comes down to fundamental human drives, I think.
There is the search for explanation. We simply dislike brute facts. We want to know the sufficient reason why something is the way it is and where the chain of causality truly starts.
There is also just a profound sense of wonder at existence itself, the sheer fact that there is something at all rather than nothing.
That inherent mystery forces us to examine the edge of reality.
And finally, I think a desire to understand whether reality, this incredible cosmic machine that contains us, has a direction, a purpose, or a meaning that transcends the daily struggles of our lives.
It's an incredible body of knowledge.
And you, the listener, now have the comprehensive architectural map of humanity's pursuit of cosmic origins, understanding not just the answers, but why those answers were so fiercely debated.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We leave you with this final thought for reflection. Whether we choose to imagine a singular first instant that defines the start of all things, or an eternal cycle of creation and dissolution that negates all beginnings, or even a concept that puts reality beyond time altogether. The sources suggest that the question of the universe's beginning is ultimately a question about our own beginning.
And about how we find meaning by placing our short, time-bound lives within that much, much larger
And possibly infinite story.